Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We are joined by a special guest here in the studio today. We have Nick Bowcott, and there's some big news associated with you sitting on that couch across from me. You're actually working at Sweetwater now.
Yep.
After years at Fender and Marshall, and of course as a much vaunted metal guitarist.
That's $20 I am already. It's pathetic. Actually, no, 40, 50, 60 bucks.
Nice.
Three compliments
I'm doing pretty well.
less than a minute. Yeah.
I'll keep going.
The check's in the mail, buddy, and we'll fix it in the mix. Yeah, this Sweetwater's been my home away from home for the last 3 or 4 years because I come here and train so often, and home is where the heart is, I guess.
I guess so. Well, we're thrilled to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here, I gotta say.
When did I meet you first? 2005, something like that?
Something like that,
Somewhere around there, yeah. It's been a long time. You've been coming here with Marshall and, like I say, some of the Jackson and Charvel and some of the Fender brands as well. So.
You know, it's not bad being as we're both only 24. So,
I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
We both started when we were 12. It's staggering.
Something like that. So you started out as a, mathematician, right?
Yeah, believe it or not, I have a degree in mathematics.
Nice.
Nothing to do with Sally Struthers either. So it's a legitimate one from Manchester University in England.
So how do you get from mathematics to Grim Reaper?
Sold my soul, basically.
Uh-huh.
No, to me, to a degree, mathematics and music, especially on the guitar, I view the guitar as a dot matrix. Mm-hmm. And that's mathematics, nothing to do with Keanu Reeves. Right. But or different colored tablets. But yeah, I visualize the guitar as a series of dots on a neck. Mm-hmm. And that's a matrix to me. And music is math anyway. Harmony is math.
Sure.
Real music is nothing to do with math at all, but the principles have a lot to do with mathematics.
Right.
They call it theory for a reason.
Right.
And there are formulas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some bands write songs with formulas. The technical term for that is they suck. No, they don't. No, they don't necessarily. But
right.
Music should come from here, mm-hmm. And that's why I'm here. And yeah, Grim Reaper was just, we liked the name basically, and I guess everyone else was scared to use it.
Right.
Because I was shocked. Actually, one person did. I think Rick Nielsen was in a band called the Grim Reapers, but no one had trademarked Grim Reaper, which shocked me.
Right.
You know, with Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, and it fitted what we were. And we needed something outside of the faces in the band because we were all 4 really ugly guys. So we needed to create a mascot like Eddie and Iron Maiden. I'm not saying the Maiden guys are ugly,
right?
But David Beckham's not in that band. But yeah, we needed something that wasn't the band that people could associate with, and it actually worked quite well for us. Mm-hmm.
So this was in the heyday of 80s metal?
Yeah, the new wave of British heavy metal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw Iron Maiden before they were signed. Mm-hmm. And it was a wonderful time to be around just because there was no internet, there was no social media, there were no cell phones. So you couldn't, if you wanted to check a band out, you couldn't go on YouTube. You had to go and watch the band. You had to go and find out where they were playing, then you had to get there. Then if you wanted to meet your friends afterwards, you have to go this time, this place. There was no texting.
Right.
People go, what happened if you weren't there? It's like, you got stuck.
Mm-hmm.
I got left at a festival once.
Right.
And it was my fault. I missed the designated slot. Mm-hmm. So I hitched it home the next day. But they were interesting times, simpler times in a way.
Right.
But There was more fun because you really had to go out. Like if you wanted to get your band known, you couldn't have a Facebook page. Like nowadays, people go, I'm in the band, we've got a Facebook page. How many shows have you done? Well, we're on YouTube. No, how many shows have you done? We've got a Facebook page. And we've got Twitter. Mm-hmm. You actually had to get out there and play.
Right, it's a little different world.
Yeah, so paying your dues in the old days. The bands nowadays still pay their dues, but some people try and shortcut it. They watch The Voice and think, all I've got to do is make Adam Levine like me and I'm set.
Right.
Whereas he's the first guy to tell you've got to pay your dues, because he did. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, right. It was I was happy to have been a musician in that time. I'm still a musician allegedly now, but
of course, yeah.
The 80s was a magical time, because you had to literally get out there and go for it.
Right. Is it true that the band was discovered as part of a Battle of the Bands?
Yeah, we won 2 Battle of the Bands in succession. The first one of the judges was a guy called Roy Wood from a band called Wizard. Mm-hmm. So that got us in a recording studio where Judas Priest recorded. And the demo we recorded there resulted in the deal we got with a local independent. It did very well in the English heavy metal charts. And then RCA signed us.
Right, right. Quite a story. So how long were you touring with them? How long were you out?
I formed the band in 81. See, back in the 80s too, you could play every weekend at really good venues.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it's a lot harder to do that, unfortunately.
Right.
The circuit doesn't exist the same way it did back then at a lower level. But through, I guess, 11 years in total, we ended up with a big lawsuit issue with a record company in England who ripped us off. But he ended up being exposed by a national TV show. And he went bankrupt literally overnight.
Right.
But the band had already dissolved then, and they'd already moved me to America. But no regrets, you know. Some people say, do you wish you'd continued? It's like, I remember once I interviewed, had the good fortune to be a writer, and I remember interviewing Michael Schenker. And I asked Michael why he felt his time with UFO was held in such reverence. And I can't use the language he used to tell me, but he basically said, it's because we split up before we made the record when people went, why the hell did you make that record?
Right.
And that
Left them
happens,
wanting more, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we left a very small amount of people wanting more, and I'm still very humbled that every week I'll get people will send me pictures of Sirius Radio in their cars with one of my songs. Normally the See You in Hell song, but
Right.
it's nice to know that, God, 33 years later, they're still playing that nonsense.
Yeah, that's awesome.
God bless them.
That's awesome. And you, not too long ago, you did some gigs with the band, right?
Yeah. Steve, the singer, has carried on. Steve, unfortunately, had a bad accident he got an infection in his leg in South America recently, and they had to amputate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he's going through some hardships now. It's kind of nice because the metal communities are very... people look at the metal community sometimes and think it's a bunch of Neanderthals who can't walk and chew gum at the same time, let alone write.
Or do math.
Yeah, exactly. But it's actually some of the smartest, most genuine people I've met are in that field. And the whole community's come together. A bunch of famous people have asked me to help them, like they're going to do a single to help raise money for his medical funds, all of that good stuff. So.
Nice, that's great.
Yeah, but it was nice to go back in time. Like, we sold the whiskey out, which staggered me. Nice. Because we never played the whiskeys because we were deemed too big. Mm-hmm. But the whiskey is one of those venues where it's one of those, I guess, a bucket list tick for me. Right. So that was nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's
so
awesome.
Good fun.
So after the band, you started writing, you mentioned writing, for Circus magazine.
Correct,
first. Yeah. And then later for Guitar World and some of the others. But how did you get into that side of things?
What happened was I wanted to write I used to teach. I enjoy teaching, which is one of the reasons I enjoy what I do now, which is predominantly, it's kind of teaching, marketing, especially when I was doing the Marshall thing, was training people how to use the amps. I used to teach guitar and I enjoyed it thoroughly, so I wanted to write a book, and my management got me, remember Arlen Roth and Hot Licks? Sure. He didn't do books, but he liked my presentation enough to say, why don't you do a teaching course? So I did a 6-hour teaching cassette course with him, which nearly killed me because I labored over every sentence, and that went to Circus to be reviewed, and the editor liked it so much he said, hey, Carlos Cavazzo's quitting doing the column, we'd like you to take over. So I ended up doing exactly 100 columns for Circus. Nice. Which was a lot of fun because that meant I could write about my heroes, analyze their playing, and then put it on a page. Right. So I got to pick and choose who I wanted to write about. And then Guitar World asked me if I'd write for them because they liked what they saw. Well, actually, what happened, which was funny, is that I was relocated to, if I can tell this story, I was relocated to America by RCA. We recorded an album, we had a band called Barfly. Michael Wagner mixed it, and they wanted the editor of Guitar World to write the bio, because he'd come out to the recording sessions, really liked it. But I was in England, and this was before, like, fax was in its infancy. International calls were really expensive. So he said, Dan, I want to talk to Nick. I said, well, why don't I write something and I'll fax it to you? So I wrote it and faxed it to him, and he went, this is really good, will you write for me? So that's how that transpired. So it was Circus help, but it was really me writing my own bio and sending it to this guy.
How about that?
And the cool thing was then they decided that my penchant was talking to guitar players about their guitar playing styles. And then I ended up being a ghostwriter for famous people's columns. And I loved that. The first one I got was it's one of those things where you remember where you were when you get a call. It was on a payphone. And Brad Talinsky, the editor back then, and said, hey, look, we've just got Eric Johnson, we've got Kirk Hammett to do columns for 6 months, one a month for 6 months. We want a young kid. Who do you think's the guy? And I said, this was before he was Dimebag, it was Diamond Darrell. I said, it's got to be Diamond Darrell. He went, you know what, you're right. So he gave me that job. And Darrell's column became so popular, it just didn't stop. I think we did 68 in the end.
Wow.
And he was about to come back for another one when, sadly, his life was taken. And we would spend hours on it because he dotted every I and crossed every T. I'd interview him 3 or 4 times, put it together. So I was basically engineering and producing, if you will. And that led to, they gave me Kirk Hammett, then I got Iommi. I did some stuff with Yngwie, Dave Mustaine, Marty Friedman. It's a ridiculous list.
Nice.
And I used to tell people, said, they would pay, I would get to sit with people whose playing I admired, get them to show me how they do stuff and why they do it, and I got paid for it. It was the best gig on the planet.
Yeah, no doubt.
Hey, have Yngwie show you how he does stuff and we'll pay you for it. Really? Okay. So that's how we got into the writing thing.
Wow.
And it's both the Dime and the Kirk Hammett columns resulted in books coming out as well, which was fun.
Yeah, no doubt.
So it was good, and it kept me in the loop with. By then I was working for Marshall, but that kept me in close contact with what was really going on. Because you can sometimes when you get onto the other side of the industry, you lose touch with what's going on.
Right. And
with that in mind, I have to play. As I know you do, if you're a musician and you're a true musician, you have to play. It's the healthiest addiction on the planet.
Right. It becomes part of you.
I don't need to play. I want to. Well, I do. I need to as well, but the want exceeds. I need to lose weight. I guess I don't want to. Do you know what I mean? Well, I do, but obviously not enough. But yeah, and that's why the passion. The Sweetwater exudes passion, and I'm really happy to be part of it.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad to have you here. So how long were you with Marshall then, and what kind of things were you doing for that company?
I started with Marshall in end of 92, and I was hired to demonstrate the JMP1 MIDI preamp. And they sent me out on the road to see how I'd react with end consumers. And I quickly learned that if you wanted to turn someone onto an amp, if they were wearing a Metallica shirt, you dialed in a Metallica sound and played the Metallica stuff. And if they were wearing a Stevie Ray Vaughan shirt, you did the same thing. So you try and read the customer, and it's not about you, it's about what they want.
Right.
And so my demo became, it was a sequence. I did it with a really, really talented MIDI programmer with one of the Korg keyboards. Did bass and drums on it, and it went from Metallica to Aerosmith to Alice in Chains to the Doobie Brothers to Michael Jackson. It was like 4 bars, 8 bars, just a medley with MIDI doing all the switching, and that became my calling card.
Right.
And then I became involved in artist relations, then became involved in marketing, then became involved with actual product development as well.
Right.
So I was with Marshall from 93 to 2008. Then I got the proverbial offer you couldn't refuse from Fender to work with Jackson, Charvel, and EVH, and Eddie's one of my heroes. So the chance to work with Eddie Van Halen, albeit fleetingly, I worked with Eddie on the Wolfgang launch. I'll never forget that, because he's the reason people like me exist.
Right.
He really is, as is Randy Rhoads, and that I got to do both the Randy Rhoads. I was fortunate enough to be able to spearhead the Randy Rhoads signature amp, and also the replica of the Concorde, where we actually went to Musonia while his mother was teaching, and those guitars were pulled out of the case for only the second time in history since he passed.
Wow.
Yeah, that was one of those. And I did it with Mike Shannon and Chip Ellis. Mike Shannon's the guy who built the black one for Randy. And has been with Jackson ever since, and Chip Ellis is the guy who did Eddie's Frankenstein replica. We went in with plastic, with like rubber gloves, the whole. Dolores says, "No, you don't have to do that." We're going, "Yes, we do. This is history right here." And her only request was, that nothing had changed. Nothing had changed. Nothing had been touched. She said, "Please don't play them because it's still the same strings."
Wow.
You open the case, you could smell the cigarettes still. There was a cigarette packet, some packet of Marlboro still in there. His strap as he left it. But the thing I did is we had the black one and the white one, the white one being the big Concorde, the one that made him look tiny because he was tiny. I swear to God, I can't say it was A440 because it might have been tuned to E flat, but the black one was slightly out of tune. The white one was in tune, was in relative tune. And we all went, "What?" Because you expected to go,
right, after all those years.
It was an open guitar.
Wow.
And it was one of those, those two guys, watching those guys, it was like watching an episode of Quincy.
Right.
It really was.
Right.
CSI. They measured every dowel, because there were dowels in the white one which had sunk down because they'd filled holes where they weren't. And then the dowel had sunk, so the paint had sunk. They replicated all of that. And it was just watching those two guys work. And someone documented it all on both video and camera. And just to physically hold those instruments, it's like, because they changed history.
Right.
So that was pretty cool. Then I ended up going back to Marshall. And
you worked pretty closely with Jim Marshall himself.
Yeah, that was something I can't put in words. Well, I can actually. I had this done.
Beautiful.
This is Mr. Marshall, and yeah, he was a mentor. For some reason, he took a shine to me. So whenever he came to America, I was always his right-hand guy. So I had I spent hours with the man, many, many, many hours. And I heard people go, "Aren't you tired of hearing," because Jim would always be asked the same few questions, obviously. And they were the great questions. They wanted to know about Hendrix, they wanted to know about Townsend, they wanted to know how he made the amps in the first place and why. And I must have heard those stories hundreds of times. I was involved in the books as well. And Jim was such a great storyteller, and he was so passionate about what he did, because I mean, how can you get tired of Jim Marshall meeting Jimi Hendrix? Because Jimi Hendrix's name was James Marshall Hendrix.
Right.
And the whole, the fact that Mitch Mitchell was taught by Jim and worked in the store, and then was Jimmy's drummer, and then Jimmy came from the USA to London, played with Clapton, saw Marshalls everywhere, and went, "These amps sound great, and he's got my name, James Marshall Hendrix, Jim Marshall." So he wanted to meet Jim.
Right.
And the Townsend stories about not being happy with the sound, which is why Jim did the amps in the first place. I mean, because really, I think that if everyone will say that rock guitar exists because of 4 or 5 people, you could say Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, of course, Pete Townsend, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, a bunch of Brits and 1 American. In truth, in my opinion, it's because of 4 Americans and 1 Brit.
Yeah.
And the 4 Americans are Leo Fender, may he rest in peace, because you can imagine a world without the Strat, the Telly, the P-Bass or the Jazz Bass, the Fender Twin, the Bassman. We wouldn't be here.
Right.
Then there's the genius that was Les Paul, not only for the Les Paul and as an artist, but for multi-track recording.
Right.
And a funny, nice guy as well.
Right.
One of the highlights of my life was myself and Jimmy Archie managed to get Jim and Les together for only the 2nd time in history. It took us all day because the 2 guys, they're both so busy doing stuff. We got them together in Nashville. The other guy is Seth Lover, who everyone forgets, but I'm sorry, a Les Paul with a single chord doesn't cut it, in my opinion.
Right.
And the last, but by no means least, Jim Marshall. They're the 4 guys that made the tools that enabled people like Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, Pete Townsend, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton to make the music that created the reason we have jobs, basically. Right. So it's fascinating. So to be able to spend time with one of those guys who was who built he was one of the cornerstones of the foundation of modern rock pop music. It was an honor and a privilege. So to be part of that was I remember Jim with fondness.
Absolutely.
Yeah, was a special man.
Right, right.
A good man too, like a very generous man. What people don't realize about Jim Marshall is he gave millions of pounds to charity, and no one knows about it because, like all true people who were truly charitable, like Mr. Sirac, for example, it's not a publicity stunt. It's like some of these Hollywood idiots who use it as a tax write-off and hey, look at me.
Right.
It's like, no. Like Zakk Wylde pledged $2 million to St. Jude's. No one knows about that because it wasn't about Zakk. And Zakk told them, I don't want any press. I'm telling you now because I think people should know. But it was never a press release. And, you know, Jim came from a very poor background. Like, he had tubercular bones, so he had no education because if he fell over, he would fracture his bones. Luckily, he grew out of it, but he literally lived his early life in a plaster cast.
Wow.
So he was bedridden, literally in a plaster. He was cocooned in a plaster prison, as Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs said on his podcast. And so no formal education, but just a driven human being.
Right.
And it wasn't just the right place at the right time. It was the right place, right time, with the right passion, the right drive, and the vision, and the sheer. I don't care if people say I can't do it. I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
That kind of drive is not enough. Sometimes ignoring naysayers is a big part of it. And this might be out of context, but Chuck Sirac reminds me of Jim Marshall a lot. For all the, you know, it started in this. Well, it was bigger than this, obviously, but unless he was involved in the Disney movie. Right. But yeah, I mean, they both built empires from a single-minded passion. And that's if I had to describe Jim Marshall with one word, it would be passion. If I had to describe this man with one word, it'd be passion.
Right.
And true, genuine passion, it's infectious, and it has a trickle-down effect.
Sure.
And I see it in Sweetwater. The trickle-down from Mr. Sirac is huge.
Right, right.
And it's really cool to be here.
Right, that's what we're...
And I get to clean both bathrooms, by the way. Male and female, so there's...
So I have to ask you, all those years with Marshall and with Jackson Charvel, Fender, EVH, obviously you've met pretty much a who's who of guitar players through those years, as well as builders and all kinds of artists, if you will. Is there a defining factor you've seen among those successful top-tier people that makes them what they are? Is there a characteristic that stands out among all of those in common?
There's probably more than one. It's not God-given talent to a degree, but talent without action is worthless. So they've all, you know, people will say David Beckham was one of the best soccer players of all time because he had a talent. The same with Tiger Woods. What they don't see, or with the Dr. J, they don't see those people put more into their talent than most people would be prepared to put in.
Right.
It's often said that David Beckham was the first on the training field and the last one off. And Yngwie Malmsteen, a staggering player. He's put out. You're not born with that speed. It's like a gymnast is not born with the ability to do a triple Lindy or whatever.
Whatever they call it.
Whatever they call it. It's
I think that was Rodney Dangerfield.
Hours of it's true gymnast. Yeah, the hours and hours of dedication, and also the fact that pretty much I've never met someone who was truly great at anything who thought they were great. And that's part of it, I think. They're always striving to be better. I've had the good fortune of working with Slash on several signature amps, and he's a really lovely human being, very humble, very modest. Every time I see him play, he's better, because he's working on it. They're all working on it. All the truly great players I know work on it.
Right.
It's the hours, but no one sees that stuff. You know, from a Dave Mustaine to a James Hetfield to a Dimebag, to a Joe Satriani, to a Steve Vai, to, I could go on, the list is endless. They're all great at what they do because of what people don't see them doing, which is the hours of dedicated practice. So I would say passion, dedication, and I would say too, humility. and they're all really nice guys as well, which makes it, that's what makes it special.
Right.
When you meet your hero and he's a nice guy and you become friends, that's hard to put a value on. But I would say, yeah, and the self-belief, but humble at the same time, because there's a drive, there's something that drives people. I believe that humans are capable of anything. It's just that most people aren't prepared to do what those who get somewhere do. What's the saying? It's not knowing what to do, it's doing what you know.
Right.
I know if I want to be a better player, I better practice for 3 or 4 hours a day. I don't know many people who do, but the people I do who do that, they're really good guitar players.
Right.
Or they're really good golfers, or they're really good, whatever your passion is. So, yeah, and they've all followed their heart. They found their bliss and they followed it with, it's like almost like the Bruce Lee mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Now you look at that man. And they've all got stuff you can learn from them as well. They're willing to play it forward. That's what I like as well. They'll show you stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when someone shows you how to do something and doesn't hide it under a blanket, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
kind of rambling, but
Absolutely.
yeah.
No, that's very cool. Very cool. Well, man, we're so excited to have you here at Sweetwater.
Awesome.
You're going to be doing some articles and writing for the website and for Sweet Notes and some of our publications, and also hopefully we're going to get you here in the video studio to do some demos for us, and who knows what else we're going to put you to work doing.
I'm looking forward.
Yeah, we're very excited.
Yep.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Glad to have you here.
Pleasure.
And thank you for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute. I'm Mitch Gallagher.